Singaporeans, I think, they want the poor foreigners to come because they're able to provide the cheap labor.
Meet Calvin Cheng, a successful Singaporean entrepreneur and former nominated member of parliament. He studied in the UK and lived in China for 7 years. In our conversation, Calvin talked about what Singaporeans do better than others, the biggest danger to Singapore's future, and the problem with how foreigners are integrated in Singapore. I'm Chernov, let's go!
When you're abroad, do you miss anything about Singapore?
I guess I miss the ease of living. Right? In most countries, things are, well, it's not more difficult, but it is normal, right? Sometimes you have to travel an hour just to get to a shopping mall, you know. Things are not always smoothly working, you know, you have to be more careful when you are going somewhere. So, you know, some things you have to worry about. I wouldn't call it missing. I don't miss anything. You know, I enjoy whatever city or country I happen to be in. The only thing that I probably miss is the cleanliness because I have OCD. So I don't like dirty places, right? So when I'm in somewhere where it's very dirty, and a lot of the big major developed country cities, Western cities are actually very dirty. London, Paris, New York, they're all very, very dirty, and I miss the cleanliness.
What do you think like Singaporeans good at? Overall, like compared to other nations?
I think Singaporeans are honest people in general because, again, everything is a double-edged sword. So growing up in a country without corruption, without a lot of crime, you become a bit guileless. But on the other hand, being guileless also means that you are probably also a bit naive and also a bit honest, right? So in the sense that you don't need to be duplicitous as much as in some places where you have to be always on your guard all the time. Singaporeans, I think, are also very good technocrats with a very good education system. So everyone here is very well educated. So we make very good employees. But on the other hand, because we make very good employees and because there's no sense of danger here, it means that people don't want to take risks here. That means that Singaporeans in general are not very good entrepreneurs.
What's the biggest challenges for Singapore, you think, like within the next 3-5 years?
We are entering a stage where we are going to have a super aged society. So like every other developed country in the world, people are not giving birth, the country is getting aged. The problem is that unlike other countries, we are very, very small and we have very limited natural resources. So human beings are actually our largest resource. If a large segment of a society is aging and becomes economically inactive, that means that we have to bring in immigrants. But the people get upset when we bring in immigrants, right? They get, just like in every other developed country, say, oh, they're stealing my jobs, you know. But that's not true. But unlike other countries that can shut themselves off, so if you are Australian, you can say, hey, listen, I don't want any more immigrants, I'm going to shut myself off. They're self-sufficient. They're going to exist for the next 50, 100 years. They can, if they are thirsty, they have enough water, if they are hungry, they can slaughter some sheep, you know. So that's not Singapore. We are an import economy. We're the most open economy in the world. We have to be open, but now we are caught in a catch-22 situation where our people are aging, but yet we do not want immigrants, and that's very tough for Singapore.
Singapore has always been like pro-immigration since Lee Kuan Yew, right? And even now, like the percentage of not only blue collars but white collars is huge. I also talked to like expats who've been here for like 15, 20 years. They told me that there were like stages when Singapore likes you, like foreigners. Singapore doesn't really maybe like foreigners, like foreigners doesn't. What do you think the current state?
I think it's not a matter of being pro-immigrant. We are actually an immigrant society. There's no Singapore without immigrants. I'm the grandchild, the great-grandchild of immigrants, right? Even the indigenous people, the Malays, I think most of their families, the ancestors came from the surrounding Malay regions and not Singapore itself. I think in 1819 when Sir Stamford Raffles landed in Singapore, there were probably around 100 families here. So we are almost every Singaporean is a descendant of immigrants. But I can empathize, I can sympathize that when things are not going well, and this is true everywhere in the world, you want to try to blame someone, right? And you think, hey man, why are you not looking after our own people? Why are you bringing in more people? And I think it it all depends on how the economy is doing, right? So when the economy is going well, the local people most of the local people don't have anything to complain about, then they'll probably be more willing to welcome people. So I think between 2005 and 2010, we probably brought in like 1 million people, and there was a bit of a misstep with public policy where the public infrastructure did not grow fast enough to take all these people. So then people started feeling crowded, and when people start feeling crowded in the trains, in the public estates, in the shared spaces, and that's when they turn anti-foreigner. So governments will have to always, it's just not unique to Singapore, governments will always have to make sure that the domestic economy is doing well, people are looked after. Then as long as most of the people feel that their lives are going okay, they're more willing to accept newcomers. I think for the last 2 to 3 years, most of the developed world, in fact, I think a developing world as well, has experienced global inflation, rising cost of living. I think rising cost of living has also caused the incumbents to lose their elections in several countries, most recently in the United States. Of course, elections are very complex, but cost of living is a huge factor, right? So with cost of living rising, people are unhappy. When people are unhappy, they're going to try to blame someone. They're going to blame the government, and they're going to say, perhaps it's because we're bringing in foreigners and they are driving up costs. But it's all very strange because everywhere in the world people want their cake and they want to eat it as well, right? So they don't want the rich foreigners to come because they feel that those people are driving up costs, but they want the poor foreigners to come because they are able to provide the cheap labor, right? So, but you can't pick and choose. I mean, on the other hand, a lot of unreasonable locals, they want the poor foreigners to come to take up the menial jobs, but they don't want to have shared spaces with them. But you can't do that. What are you going to do? You're going to lock them up in their dorms after they finish work. I mean, that's not sustainable, right? So what Singapore is doing, what the Singapore government is doing is actually trying to reduce our reliance on foreign manual labor for various reasons. One reason is that if you want to protect jobs, the only jobs that can be protected are jobs that cannot be remotely done or cannot be brought away from Singapore. So if you're going to be a PMET, if you're going to be a computer engineer, that job doesn't have to be done in Singapore. I can hire someone in Serbia, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, or the company can just pack up and leave for another country. But the manual jobs such as construction, security, cleaning, you cannot just pack up and leave. You cannot outsource that job to someone sitting in another country. Those jobs are tied to the geography of Singapore. So those are the only jobs that we can protect. That's number one. Number two, if you want to have a more inclusive society, then you need to raise the wages of the bottom. If you're going to raise the wages of the bottom, then you're going to have to not bring in so many people at the bottom to take up the menial jobs, the manual jobs, so Singaporeans can make a living doing these jobs. Cleaning, security, retail. But once that happens, our cost of living will go up. But then you have a fairer distribution of wealth because the people at the bottom they can get their wages lifted. So what kind of vision would that be? I think the best analog, and of course my other friend Philip might disagree, is Switzerland, right? So Switzerland has, maybe until recently, has a very high standard of living. In the 90s, Singapore always aspired to be the Switzerland of Asia, right? To have a high standard of living. But they also have a very high cost of living, right? So they are very well known to have the most expensive Big Mac because they have high wages. So high wages means high cost of living, but also a higher standard of living, a more fairly distributed standard of living.
I think the thing about Singapore is like how the country wants foreigners to be integrated. For example, the migrant workers, the Singapore just import, they work here for like, let's say 5, 10, 15 years, and then they send back. For the like expats, so to say, there are like two approaches. Like one approach is America like integrate everybody. It doesn't matter like what race you are, what country you came from.
Okay.
There is another one, like let's say France or Europe in general.
So Singapore is a bit more unique because since founding we have this racial classification CMIO, Chinese, Malay, Indian and others. And if we are going to keep to that proportion and to these 4 racial groups, then it will be easier to integrate some ethnicities rather than others. So our immigration policy has unofficially, I cannot speak for the government, but it seems to me that we have focused on the CMI, right? We have brought in people from China, from India, and with the Malays, some of the Filipinos have come here. Some of the Malaysians have also moved here. Indonesians have moved here, which doesn't leave a lot of room for people like you, because you fall under the others, which is a very, very small percentage. So if we keep to this racial and ethnic model, it's going to be a lot harder to integrate people outside these racial classifications.
But you think, personally, you think it should be, this proportion should be kept, or it can be like rethought?
I think there are pros and cons. Keeping the proportions creates a kind of stability in society, because demographic changes bring political changes and sociological changes. And I think you see this in many places in the developed world, right? So in some places in America, the Latino population has now overtaken the white population, and demographics have changed, politics have changed. In Europe as well, there are some enclaves where the immigrant population from Muslim countries have more than the locally born population. Demographics change, the politics change. So we have always been very careful to make sure that Singapore is stable. And I'm sure you know about this. That 80% of our population lives in public housing. And each block of public housing, the homes are distributed in rough proportion to the national proportion of the three major races. And in order to keep that stable, if you are an ethnic minority, when you sell your apartment, you have to sell it to someone of the same racial group in order to keep the racial proportion stable.
Yeah. So you think that proportion kind of should stay?
I am not saying it should be. I'm just saying that if it isn't, we would have to adapt. I know there's no should or should not, right? It's just that things change. If things change, then policies have to change, politics have to change, and well, we'll see. I mean, it's not so easy to socially engineer everything.
If you ever wanted to launch your project, like online project, maybe with your 9-to-5 job, and be able to travel the world, make money, and be quite flexible with your own time and spend time with your friends, with family, girlfriend, boyfriend, like still making money, I have something for you. I'm launching the guide how to basically start your own online project and how to quit a 9-to-5 job. It's not ready yet. I will leave a link in description to the Google form. You fill it up, there are just few questions, and then when the guide is ready, you will know it among the first ones. Link in description. Let's do online business together.
Are you optimistic about the future of Singapore in general, like in the next 10 years, let's say?
I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic. I think I'm going to be very realistic about the future of Singapore. I think we have a very good base to work on, right? We have built a developed, wealthy country in the last 60 years. In Chinese, again, we have a saying, 富不过三代. And in English, there's something similar, rags to riches to rags in 3 generations. So this is the 4th generation, right? So it's going to be challenging. Unlike in the past, where we could copy people, right? We could either copy people, or we know what mistakes other people have made and try to avoid them. We are now also a developed country. There's no model that we think that we can follow, or mistakes that we shouldn't make. So we are on our own. We have to find a USP. We do not know what our next USP is. But fortunately, we have built up a lot of reserves. We have a very good base. We have highly educated population. So I think that we have something good to go on.
Who do you think the biggest competitors of Singapore in terms of attracting the smartest people across the globe?
I think other city-states, right? So city-states compete with city-states. So in the past, we used to compete with Hong Kong, but Hong Kong has lost its luster because of what's happening with China. One country, two systems is increasingly looking like one country, one system. They're trying to rebound. So Hong Kong has always been, because they are in the same time zone as us, right? So they've always also been a financial hub. They are a city-state. The other competitor would be Dubai. I'm not so worried about Dubai because Dubai is in a completely different time zone. They are sitting in between Asia and Europe. So in that sense, they have a bit of advantage if you are trying to do business between Europe and Asia. I think because Singapore is a hub, we cannot look at what we do as competition. We need to see ourselves as complementary to other people rather than competing with other people. So as a hub, we need to make sure that we are sitting in the middle of all the flows. So we shouldn't be seeing other people as our competitors, but people we can collaborate with.
Do you think Singapore will still be good in balancing the US and China being like
I think it's going to be increasingly difficult because we are going to live in a fragmented world. One very good example is that I'm also the honorary consul of Serbia to Singapore. When I accepted that position, being the head of the first consul of Serbia in Singapore, Serbia looked to be on the path to a very bright future because they were balancing the East and the West very well. They were saying, when people asked them, are you a friend of Russia or Europe? They said, I'm a friend of both. Are you on the side of China or the US? They say, I'm on the side of Serbia. So they were on the path to joining the European Union in 2026. But then things suddenly changed when Russia invaded Ukraine. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, suddenly the geopolitical situation for Serbia changed. They were then made to be aware that they cannot be sitting on the fence anymore. They're still trying, but the Europeans are saying, listen, if you're either with us or not with us, either you sanction Russia or you don't sanction Russia. They have chosen not to sanction Russia. And they are in a very difficult position now, right? Because they do not actually have a border with Russia. They have a border with the European Union. Their biggest trade partner is the European Union. They want to join the European Union. But their people are Slavs. Their people are Orthodox. They see themselves as brethren of the Russians. The Russians have also been very supportive of them during the Balkan War. So they see the Russians as family. China also has very close relationship with Serbia. In fact, when Xi Jinping went to Europe, he only visited 3 countries, France and Hungary of the European Union, and he visited Serbia, and he said that Serbia are our iron brothers, right? But on the other hand, they also want to be able to do business with the Americans. So they are truly caught in between. Right now, Singapore, in a lot of ways, is like what Serbia was before the Ukraine war. When people ask us, are you on the side of China or are you on the side of the Americans? We say that we are on the side of Singapore, right? And this will be great. We have done this very well in the last 60 years until a situation forces us to choose. And what situation might force us to choose is if China invades Taiwan. If China invades Taiwan, then we are going to be in a pickle because, as everyone knows, the U.S. 7th Fleet is docked in Changi Naval Base. Any military operation by the Americans to defend Taiwan will involve logistics supply from Singapore. And then the Chinese will be unhappy with us, and we are the largest foreign investor in China. We are 78% Chinese. A lot of the Chinese educated still see China as their spiritual homeland, very similar to how the Serbs see the Russians as their spiritual kin. So then we're going to have a lot more issues. So hopefully, fingers crossed, this doesn't happen, because otherwise we'll be in a very troublesome situation.
Last year, it was first time in Singapore history that the Singapore film director got recognized on the world stage. I started thinking how Intelligentsia look like in Singapore, because I'm originally from Russia, and like we call Intelligentsia is like writers, the people from theater,
so our
cinema.
Intelligentsia would be the academic elite, not people from the arts. Hopefully that's changing. Lee Kuan Yew very famously said that this was when Singapore was still developing, that we do not have the luxury for poetry. Right? So when we were developing, we focused a lot on academics, people who are skilled technically. So the Intelligentsia here tend to be, at least Gen X, my generation, Gen Y, probably the boomer generation, tend to be people who are very academically strong. But I think about 15, 20 years after I graduated, the government realized that now we are a developed country, and then we started a sports school and art school and tried to cultivate people who excel in different parts of life. And I think that's a very good thing that, and I hope that the generation after mine, there would be an intelligentsia that would be excellent writers, excellent poets, excellent actors, musicians, ballet dancers, because I think every country needs that.
And you think in the current social setup, it's possible that arts will be thriving?
We are trying. We do not know whether it's possible. Sports, for example, Singapore, we're not very good at sports, right? We've only ever had one Olympic gold medal in our history. We are trying, the government is trying. We're trying to say that there are many paths to success. It takes a mindset shift as well amongst parents, because my parents' generation, probably my generation, we grew up in a society where in order to be successful, you have to be academically successful and then get into one of the professions, because arts didn't pay. So that takes time to change.
How's your social circle look like in Singapore?
I have lots of expat friends, but I also have people that I grew up with, so it's pretty mixed, because I'm fortunate enough to be part of a group of Singaporeans that have been exposed to both.
Yeah, and they do what? They like different ways of life, different paths of life?
I wouldn't say so. My expat friends are all new, right? So most expats in Singapore are professionals, right? So my social circle amongst them tend to be very, very professional. Amongst my local friends, and again, I'm not sure whether you know about this, but Singapore, up until recently, actually now as well, we have a very harsh streaming system in education. So growing up, all Singaporeans are tested when they're 12. That's called the primary school leaving examination.
Usually, yeah.
And then the best students are sent to the best schools, and then the best schools, they are then streamed again into the best classes. And during my time, they were sent to junior colleges, and these junior colleges, the best students are sent to the best junior colleges, and then the people from the best junior colleges are then picked out, given scholarships, and then sent to the best universities in the world. So that means that it narrows your social circle, and I am academically inclined. That means that I managed to get into the best schools, and then I went to a pretty good university, right? And then over there, most of my friends were people who also excelled academically. So my social circle, my local social circle is quite narrow. These are people who have excelled academically, and because of that, most of them have middle to upper middle class jobs.
You remember your experience being a Singaporean and then exposed to UK culture back then? What was your feelings and first thoughts?
One of the stories that I like telling people is that I think during the first winter that I was at university, I was walking down the streets, and I think it's around this time 30 years ago, and I saw a homeless person, and the person was freezing. I was freezing, and I was having a thick winter coat, a thick winter jacket, and still I was freezing. And sad to say, it was only then that I realized that the person was really homeless, because you don't see homeless people much in Singapore. I mean, you rarely see homeless people, right? So, and growing up in a country without homeless people, or rather without a plethora of homeless people, you have a very different experience. So when I was there, I didn't understand why people were homeless, because I grew up in a bubble. So I thought, hey, maybe they are choosing to live on the streets, or they're pretending to live on the streets. And it was only when I was freezing that I realized that this guy can't be pretending, because I'm freezing, he must be freezing. There's no reason for him to pretend to be homeless. So Singaporeans grow up in a bubble, in a bit of a Disneyland, and I think it's true even now. Just to segue into a larger topic, I think a lot of my expat friends as well that have kids that grow up here realize that they are raising their kids in a rather unusual country, an unusually safe country, a bubble. So things that happen here are not normal in any other country. So for example, I have a couple, friends who are a married couple with kids. They are from Bulgaria. They went to school in the UK. They grew up they spent a lot of time in the UK, and the kids are here, and they were in a hawker center, and they told me a story that some strangers started to sit down next to them and sharing food with their kids. And then they suddenly realized that this is the wrong lesson. So they told the kids, you can only do this in Singapore. Nowhere else in the world can you do this. And I think people in Singapore, they grow up without a sense of danger, right? And in most other countries, where are you from?
Russia.
I'm sure you have a tiny bit of sense of danger there.
Of course, yeah.
No, I'm just being ironic, but in the UK, for example, I had to learn that there are some places that I can't go after a certain time.
Yeah.
Still, it's the same in most cities. There are places that you shouldn't go after a certain time. There are some places you shouldn't go at all. I learned to cross the street whenever I know that a bar was closing, because I know that there were a lot of drunk people. They are going to be spilling out of the bar, and there are going to be fights. And you see this a lot in every big city. Growing up, you probably saw this, but growing up, I didn't see this, right? Growing up, the kids in Singapore don't see this. You don't see people fighting on the streets. They don't see bouncers fighting with customers. Sometimes it does, but it's very rare.
Yeah.
So Singaporeans, I think, lack a sense of danger. They lack a sense of reality, because we grew up in a country that is so unusually safe and secure.
But that's actually a good thing,
Yeah.
right? It's great that Singapore is super safe.
It's good. It's a good thing here, but because we are so small, so our people have to expand their horizons, right? So, as a business person, right, I travel a lot. I have to do business in a lot of places, and once you get out of Singapore, the rules don't apply, right? Yeah. So, we are one of probably the least corrupt place in the world, but in most places, corruption is the norm. Things work, our government is efficient, our system is efficient. In most places, these things are not normal. So actually, I would actually say that when I give advice to budding entrepreneurs, I will tell them that piloting an idea in Singapore is the worst place possible. Because things that work in Singapore probably don't work anywhere else in the world, because things don't work in most places in the world, right? The system doesn't work. The rules don't work. You need to learn how to be flexible. You cannot just rely on law, rely on the system, rely that things actually work for you. Yeah. So I would say that it's not a strength, it's actually a weakness, because it's very difficult for Singaporeans to be a global citizen. We become retards, right? People who are not able to cross the road without a traffic light.
I agree with you, but it's super easy to get exposed to places with less rules. You just cross the bridge.
But most people experience that as a tourist. That's not the same. You need to go live in a place, right? So Singaporeans go to those places as a tourist. They complain. They say, "Oh no, this place is rubbish. It's very cheap. Singapore is better." Spend a week there, a couple of days there, and then they come back. So that's not the same. Which is why I actually feel that all Singaporean children should be sent for a year abroad to go live in any other country. It doesn't matter whether it's a rich or poor country, right? And then they will experience what living in a real country actually is, and not a bubble. Except for Japan. Don't go to Japan. I think Japan is quite similar to Singapore.
Yeah, you've done a lot of business in China. If you can compare, what's the way of do business and do things in Singapore and China?
So one of the best advice that a friend gave to me before I went to China was that he said that whatever you do in Singapore, you reverse it in China. This is probably a cliche, but it is true, is that Singapore is probably closer to the Western countries where you discuss business, and then you sign a contract, and then you start work, right?
Yeah.
But in China, signing a contract doesn't mean that the discussion is over. You can still continue to negotiate. That gets quite tiring. And I think this comes down to a very old value system. In Chinese, we call it 情理法. 情 is relationships. 理 is logic, reason, and 法 is the law. So in Chinese culture, it's 情理法. In the sense that the relationships have to come first, and then you appeal to logic, and when everything fails, then you go to the law. But in Western society, it tends to be the opposite. The law comes first, right? And relationships don't come in at all. If You know, they don't, it's not very important, if at all, especially with the Americans. When I do business with the Americans, I find that every single thing that goes a bit wrong, they try to send you a lawyer's letter. They are a very litigious society. Law is the bedrock of a lot of these systems. Yeah. Whereas in China, I'm sure a lot of Westerners have heard this, is about 关系, the relationship. And it's not just about exchanging name cards. Relationships are a very deep thing, right? So the relationship is the most important. It's only if the relationship is completely broken that you resort to the law.
Is there a right way to do business?
No, I don't think there's a right way or wrong way.
There's the American way and Chinese way.
I think
most successful.
I think when in Rome, you do as the Romans do.
What's your main business principles?
I think the most important thing is that you must be willing to pivot. You need to be flexible, right? I think if you are a stickler to my way or the highway, you're never going to succeed. You need to be able to pivot. You need to be flexible in doing business. That's very important in terms of your business model, right? You need to be very nimble. You don't just think that, okay, this has worked in the past, so I'm just going to continue doing it. If the circumstances change, you have to change.
Do you have to like what you do or not obligatory?
I think in business you have to like what you do as an entrepreneur, because unlike as an employee, you don't have a boss, you don't have an employer, you don't have someone driving you, so you have to drive yourself. So if you're not liking what you do, you're not gonna do it.
What's the main principle in your life? Something that's super important for you?
Probably because I went to a Chinese school. I went to the Chinese high school, Hua Chong. Relationships are very important for me. So I would say that when I'm doing business, I'm more like the Chinese than the Americans. For me, I want to preserve the relationship. I would walk away from a deal if it's going to jeopardize a friendship. Money making is not the most important for me. Friendships are the most important. So relationships, friendships, I think that is at the heart of everything that I do to preserve the human relationships around me.